Is I'm going to do make the videographers really happy today because I'm not going to go very far, so I'm just going to probably sit here for. I usually walk around a lot. Todd, thank you very much for allowing me to speak here today. I say that because you know as well as I do that when you're up here, there's a seriousness about bringing the word. And if we're held more accountable, I think, because if I'm leading you astray and the Lord, it ain't going to be good. And that is not none of our intentions whenever we have people up here. So thank you for having me today. I appreciate it. And I also want to give credit. Jeff spoke, back in January maybe? And he talked about the fear of the Lord. And he said, Jim's going to speak on it too. I'm like, thanks, Jeff. But it's a thing, he and I have been talking, for years. And we went to church with him over at River of Life years and years ago. And we always talked about this, what's coming. We're always looking ahead and trying to figure out what's coming. And he's talked here at City on the Hill numerous times about he sees some bad things coming, but when we get through the bad things, that there's going to be lots of good things. And he's always sending me, prophecies by other folks around the country. And he and I are always talking. And one of the things, or one of the groups one person, not groups, that he and I kind of landed on back in January was John Bevere. He has tons and tons of podcasts. If you have the opportunity, I don't know him, but I trust him. He says lots of good stuff. Jeff gave me this book too, The Awe of God. And it's basically a daily devotion for about 6 weeks, I think it is. I can tell I'm about halfway through it. But a lot of what I'm going to say today, I'm stealing from John Bevere. Sorry. Because, and I want to impress upon you today, Jeff and I both really believe this is where God is leading the church right now. The awe of God. And if we don't walk in the awe of God, there's lots of bad things that are going to happen for us. So I encourage you to get this book. I have some other book here in a minute to show you. But I want to first talk about, one of the things as I've been studying this is talking about the greatness of God, His greatness. And I think we have a tendency to minimize His greatness. Isaiah 66:1 says this. And I'm using the NIV, so if some of you have the other versions, that's fine. But and this says, "Heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. Where is this house you will build for me? Where will my resting place be?" Heaven is my throne. The earth is my footstool. Now, I have a footstool that's about this big at home, and sometimes I'll put my feet on it, or, we all have a little footstool. That's kind of small. But for God, His greatness, He is so great, the earth is His footstool. Does anybody know how big the earth is around, by the way? Big. It's about 25,000 miles in circumference, all the way around. 25,000 miles. 25,000 miles. Can you get that in your head? No. We can't even fathom that. Does anybody know how far it is from here to the moon?
Farther.
Yeah, about 235,000 miles. Yeah, 250,000 miles. Anybody know how far it is to the sun?
94. Further yet.
Not further. 93 million miles. You know how long it takes for the light from the sun to get to Earth?
8 minutes. 8 seconds.
8 minutes. I've heard 9 minutes, so give or take, depending on, the Earth is an elliptical orbit, so it probably depends where you're at. But yeah, so when you get up in the morning, you go sit on your deck, and you see the sun come up, for the first time, guess what? It's already been up for 8 minutes. I'm just scratching the surface of what God's greatness is in His creation. So I want you to take a minute with me. Think about your experience, not necessarily of God's greatness, but of something great that you experienced. Just think about that for a minute. And while you're thinking about that, I want to show you a picture of one of my experiences. There we go. Is that okay? Can you see that all right? Yeah. That's me. We were in California 4 years ago? I guessed it right. Yay. And we went to the redwood forests. I could not get enough of it. The greatness of those trees. I felt like I had to see every tree. I wanted to see every tree because I just felt like I was walking in the presence of God's greatness. Has anybody been there to see those trees? It's incredible. Absolutely incredible. Now, we weren't in the south. I think those were the sequoias in the south. They're a little shorter but bigger around, I guess. We were in the north where they're taller but still bigger around. Incredible greatness. So, little audience of participation here. I'd like you to share with me what is one of your experiences of greatness? Something great. Huh?
The Grand Canyon.
Oh, that's on my bucket list. I want to go see the Grand Canyon, yeah.
Go to the North Rim.
North Rim? All right. So what did you experience there?
Just the size and the beauty of the colors and
Yeah.
watching the sunrise.
Oh, got there for that. It was up 8 minutes before that, by the way. You don't have to share, but it's somebody else. Yeah.
The Blue Mountains in Australia.
Mountains in
It
Australia.
was a huge valley, and I was so overwhelmed by the beauty. I wanted to jump.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, it was the craziest feeling. I knew I can't jump, they're going to die.
That might not be a good thing, sure.
So overwhelmed by the beauty, I just wanted, it was indescribable.
Yeah, yeah. Anyone else like to share?
Mount of Olives, looking at Jerusalem.
Ooh. And thinking about when Christ returns, he's going to have 1 foot on this mountain and 1 foot on this mountain, and it's going to, yeah. Whew. Yeah. I mean, Jeremy even this morning suggested about when Christ returns with a trumpet on a cloud and the heavens are going to be opened up. What? The greatness of that event is beyond our human comprehension. What is that? What is that? So here's another picture of a great event that I had just recently. Anybody know who that is, aside from not me, but the other person? Anybody know who that is? We went to Montgomery, Alabama for a wedding 3 weeks ago, and I didn't want to go. We had to fly, we had to drive, we had to get a rental car, blah, 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 blah. It was hot. No, it wasn't that hot. But my wife says, oh, it's going to be a military wedding. I'm like, oh, gosh. Well, you didn't say it that way. I said it that way. I was like, oh, I don't want to go to it's a military wedding. We get there, and we get to this. It was a Catholic wedding, and that was fine. I was about Catholic. It's fine. The whole mass with this, all that stuff mixed into it. And I see, okay, military wedding. A lot of people in the military uniform. The father of the groom, I find out. I don't know if maybe during the service or maybe after that he's a 4-star general. I'm like, ooh, 4-star general. Kind of started to perk my interest. Hey, this trip might be worth it after all. So we get to the reception, and I'm thinking, okay, 4-star general. I've never been that close to somebody that important, or anybody that important. And so we're sitting there with her cousin, and we're just chit-chatting. And come to find out, this is 4-star General James Dickinson. Everybody know who that is? You should.
We will.
You will. He is the commander of the Space Command. He's part of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He meets with the president regularly. He knows things that I don't. Secret things that I don't. And I want to know those things. So I'm all geeked out now. I'm like, what? here we are, all this way, I'm going to see you for. So the father of the bride, who is my wife's cousin's husband, I talked to him. I said, hey, can I get a picture with him? I want to get a picture of him with him. He's like, oh, yeah, no problem. And I'm like, no, it's not going to happen. So me and her cousin, we're getting our jokes out of the way so we don't have to embarrass ourselves. So like, hey, beat me up, James. Got any aliens in your pocket? Those kinds of things. We're trying to. And so he comes back, the father of the bride, and he goes, hey, I talked to him. We got you hooked up. And I'm like, okay, great. Me and her cousin's name is Gary. We're all geeked out. We're just like, what? This is crazy. He's the Space Command. He's going to join you. What? No way. And so, the evening starts to wind down. And sure enough, we get a picture with him. And here's me standing next to a 4-star general, the commander of the Space Command, part of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I'm standing next to him, and what? Little giddy schoolboy. Exactly. And he asked me, so you're interested in space? And so we try to be cool. I'm going to be cool. Yeah, I am. Take minutes. Yeah, I should share that with him. Yeah. And so it made the trip worthwhile, just the bottom line. But here's my point. We're talking about the awe, the fear of God. I was in awe of this man. I was all geeked out over this man. What happened? It replaced my awe of God. And that's what happens when we begin to, put man, woman up, rise them up above their should-be position. We idolize them, so to speak. We make them great in our eyes. We make men and women great in our eyes. And what happens? It minimizes the awe of God. Our fear of God. It minimizes. I learned that. So I had to go clear to Montgomery, Alabama to learn a lesson that God wanted to teach me, So it replaces that. That's not what we want. I think of all the celebrities that we raise up and say, oh, aren't they great? The sports, sorry, those of you who are in sports, we like sports athletes. We raise them up. We say, oh, look at them, aren't they great? What are they replacing in your life? What are they replacing in your heart? Because inevitably they're going to let you down. Years ago, you guys remember, maybe you don't remember, Lance Armstrong, 7-time Tour de France winner. The world had raised him up. He was part of a cancer foundation, raising all kinds of money for the Cancer Foundation. And the world had raised him up on a pedestal and said, isn't this man great? Well, he tried to have a comeback after a couple of years after retiring, and oh, by the way, he's blood doping. And now, in his later years, he's been banned from all professional competitions. He's been stripped of his 7 titles. There's no mention of him in the history books anymore. So we got to be careful. We got to be careful when we're looking at men and women and putting them up on pedestals. We got to be careful. But here's another thing I learned with this experience with this man. And don't get me wrong, he's a very great man, but he's nowhere near as great as my Lord. Nowhere near. He pales in comparison. But here's something else I learned. Worship comes out of a revelation or experience of God's greatness. I hesitate to use the word true worship, but I think it's applicable there. True worship comes out of a revelation or experience of His greatness. I could have very easily, met this man and idolized him and began to worship the ground he walked on, right? I don't know that you do that, but the world does that with celebrities, sports athletes. They idolize the ground these people walk on. But my true worship comes from my experience. That's why I think I wanted to see every tree in the redwoods. I wanted to worship God in that moment. I hugged the tree because my mom, we would categorize her as a tree hugger, and I did that for my mom. But in reality, could I say in a spiritual sense that God and I were that close in that moment? God isn't in the trees by any means, but He created the trees. His greatness is shown in those trees. His greatness. And I had to worship in that moment. You know, Grand Canyon. In that moment, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, in that moment, you wanted to worship God, I would think. In that moment, you wanted to worship God. Because we experienced His greatness. And that's what true worship really is, to me. That's the thing I learned from this. So, we are filled with the glory, if we fill ourselves with the glory and awe of man, the result of this reduces our fear or awe of God. I really think, and this is where John Bevere is talking about, we really need to get back to the awe of God. Because it has a ton of benefits, which I don't have time to go into today, but we're going to talk through a couple of things. There's a ton of benefits walking in the fear of God. We also, I believe, we need to recognize the authority of God. Because that's part of His greatness. It's part of His greatness. When He returns on a cloud, that's great, but why is it great? Because He's reestablishing His authority on earth. He's reestablishing it. He's saying, you men, women of this worldly world, that sounds kind of weird, you got nothing on me. And because we experience the greatness in that moment, we're going to fall down and worship.
Yeah.
Because His greatness, it comes out of us.
Yes.
So we have to recognize His authority as well. So what is, and you may have heard some of this stuff before, but what is the fear of God? It's not like, I'm afraid. No, it's not that. Though some people will experience that who don't know Him. So true fear or holy fear, what's the purpose? Purpose of holy fear? To draw people to Himself. Fear isn't to separate us from Him. Awe is not to separate ourselves from Him. It's to draw us to Him. Like I said, when I was walking through the redwoods, I wanted to see every tree. Because I thought I was going to miss something. I wanted to see every tree. Did you want to leave the Grand Canyon? Did you want to leave the Blue Mountains? No. I wanted to experience. It's to bring us to Himself. So if you're experiencing fear and it's separating you from God, then it's not true. It's not holy fear. So that'd be a kind of a little red flag for you in your mind. Am I afraid? Am I separating myself from God? Well, then it's not from God. Because true holy fear draws us to Him. A couple examples. Moses in Exodus 3, 1 through 6. And it says here, now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro's father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight. Why does the bush not burn up? Well, I don't know. Let's go find out. When the Lord saw that he had gone overlooked, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, here I am. "Do not come any closer," God said. "Take off your sandals, for the place you are standing is holy ground." Then he said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob." And at this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. God drew Moses to himself in that moment.
Yep.
Moses didn't run away. "Oh, I'm going to burn bush. Ah, I'm going to get out of here. Call the fire brigade, put out the fire." No, he didn't think those things. He said, "I have to go see this wondrous thing." I venture to say, probably like your guys' experience and my experience, he couldn't take his eyes off the burning bush. He couldn't take his eyes off. He was afraid. He was in awe of a God that he didn't know. So God can reveal himself and his greatness. I mean, okay, this is a great event, by the way. A burning bush that isn't consumed. Huh, that's interesting. That's pretty great to me. It drew Moses to him. God can reveal himself to non-believers, by the way. Moses was brought up in the Egyptian courts. Did he know God? He maybe knew of God, that there was a God of the Israelites, the Hebrews, but did he know him personally? No. Another example, Exodus 34, 29 through 32. And this is when he brings the tablets down. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of testimony in his hands, he was not aware that his face was radiant because he had spoken with the Lord. When Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses, his face was radiant, and they were afraid to come near him. But Moses called to them, so Aaron and all leaders of the community came back to him, and he spoke to them. Afterward, all the Israelites came near, and he gave them all the commands the Lord had given him on Mount Sinai. Now, I would say here probably initially the Israelites were afraid emotionally afraid, because here you got a man whose face is glowing. Okay, we would probably call those aliens today. But that's a pretty great event, Moses' face glowing. So I can see where they would probably initially be afraid. But then Moses, "Hey, come here, let's talk about this." But then they drew near to Moses because he was radiating God's presence. Pretty great event.
Yeah.
Again, to draw men and women to himself. That's what all holy fear of God is about. And then we always have to have be balanced in the Old and New Testament. And this is one my paper fell out. Matthew 17, 1 through 8. And I won't read the whole thing, but this is the Transfiguration, when Jesus reveals himself to his disciples. Now, they were kind of goofy. "Hey, let's set up 3 booths, one for you and you and you." But no, come on. But did they run away either? No. This is a pretty incredible event. This is a great event. It drew the disciples to Jesus. Not Jesus as the person, but Jesus as a transfigured man, revealed himself as God. So that's what really true holy fear is. Here's some other examples, or here's some other definitions. Fear is not just reverence. It is to be in awe. We talked about that a lot. We love what he loves. We love what he loves. Some of these you got to think about, let them sink in for a minute. And you can ask yourself, okay, if I'm walking in true fear of the Lord, do I love what he loves? And what does that look like? That's another question we ask ourselves. What does that look like? And the other side of it, we hate what he hates. Gosh, God hates? Sorry, guys. Yeah, he does hate some things. He hates sin. Where do we see sin in the world? Everywhere. Yeah. We honor, esteem, respect, value, tremble before him. There's a lot of words. You could spend days working through what all those mean. We honor, esteem, respect, value, tremble before him. Here's one that really hit me. We take on his heart. This is all part of the holy fear of God. It's so full. Here's another thing. We have nothing to hide. I can come before my God. He knows me. I know him. I got nothing to hide. I've said this to my wife. I say this to my students at school sometimes. I'm an idiot. I'm a sinner. I do dumb things. And God knows it. And that's okay. It's okay. How about this one? We fear separation from him. Think about that one for a minute. We fear separation. I didn't want to leave the redwoods. I was afraid to leave. I'm like, no, I'm going to miss something. That's the depth of our passion, that our passion should be for his greatness. That when I experience his greatness, I fear being separated from that greatness. I don't want it to go away. I want to be part of it. I want to stay part of it. So let's kind of flip this over a little bit. False fear. You can talk about that a little bit, because we talk about what holy fear is. But what about false fear? If holy fear is to draw us to him, then what's false fear? Separates us from him. Right. So these are going to be a couple little red flags for you to kind of go, oh, that's what that means. Okay, if I'm experiencing that, well, then I'm walking in this. If I'm experiencing this, I'm walking in this. Here's a perfectly good example, Adam and Eve. Everybody knows this story, Genesis 3, 8 through 10. The woman said to the serpent, this starts verse 2, we may eat fruit from the trees of the garden, but God did say you must not eat from the fruit that is in the middle of the garden. Oops, sorry. 8 through 10, not starting in verse 3. Sorry. Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day. They hid from the Lord among the trees of the garden, but the Lord called to them, where are you? He answered, I heard you in the garden. I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid. Think about those definitions that we talked about of what holy fear is. They were basically on the other side of all of those. All of them. God knew. He knew why they were hiding. He knew they had sinned. He knew they were going to sin. Get your head around that one for a minute, but he knew. So they were afraid because they were trying to hide from him. They loved what he hated. They hated what he loved. I mean, mix up those words a little bit in the previous definition. They did everything opposite of what was going on there. And thus sin entered the world. Acts 5, 10 through 11. This is Ananias and Sapphira, and we all know this story pretty well. They had sold some land, and John Bevere goes into a lot of detail of this particular passage and what this is all about. But essentially, they were trying to keep up appearances in the church. If you go back earlier on, there was another, I think Barnabas came and sold the field and owned and brought the money and put it at the apostles' feet. So they were like, well, wait a minute, Barnabas did that. We got to do something. Let's just go sell some land but not give them all the money. But why did they die? This is a whole other probably message you could talk about in terms of why did they die? We could compare this to why didn't the sons of Eli die when they were, doing bad stuff in the temple? It has to do with the presence of the Lord. Peter walked in the presence of the Lord. The presence of the Lord was there in that moment. And the Holy Spirit was there in that moment. And when you're in the presence of the Holy Spirit, you cannot stand. And if you're going to lie in the presence of the Lord, there's going to be some bad stuff that happens. Bad stuff. And that's essentially what happened with Ananias and Sapphira. But here at the end, verse 10, I'll jump down to there. At that moment she fell down at his feet and died. This is Sapphira. And then the young men came in and finding her dead, carried her out and buried her beside her husband. Great fear seized the whole church and all who heard about these events. Are they saying there that the church of the time scattered because they were all afraid to be in the presence of Peter, or the presence of God? No. An awe, a reverence fell upon the church that drew them closer together, that solidified them as the early church. That's what this fear was about. It wasn't to separate them, it was to draw them closer to God. So here's where I want to kind of take this morning. I hope you can follow with me here for a minute. I believe that a revelation of God's greatness, okay, we got that in our heads, those great things you've experienced, leads to a holy fear. When we experience God's greatness, we want to, okay, yeah, it's cool, it's all good. We're not afraid, but there's a reverence. We fall down and worship. And then, that holy fear leads to humility. Because we are nothing in the face of God. A familiar verse, 2 Chronicles 7:14, which I don't know if I have a life verse, but I keep coming back to this verse over and over again. And it goes, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sins and heal their land. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves. So I think this is part of a cyclical process. When we consider the greatness of God and walk in holy fear of Him, the result is humility, which leads to a revelation, and we've got this wonderful, did it come through all right? I don't know how it's going to look, Tony. My little diagram. Hey, how about that? It's cyclical. Because when we walk in humility, I think we're going to be more attuned to His greatness. We're going to recognize more often His greatness. And when we walk in His greatness, we're going to be in awe and we'll sit back and wonder of His greatness. And when we see those things, we're going to recognize, oh, I'm nothing in comparison to that. I walk in humility. And when I walk, I think it's just this process that God continues to take us through. And the benefits of these things, there's a whole, let's just start with the fruits of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness. We want healing even. That's not even one of those. We want healing, but if I submit this to you, if we're not walking in this cyclical process, I don't believe we're going to find healing. I don't believe we're going to find deliverance. My beliefs, faith. Our faith is going to be increased when we're walking in this process. So I submit that to you. It's kind of my beliefs. But let's take a moment and think about God's greatness. We had some examples. He stands at the beginning and end of time. What? He stands at the beginning and the end of time. He sees all of time. For us, we live on this mortal coil for 120 some odd years maybe, or less. We got much of eternity. When I'm talking about the end of time, He stands at the end of eternity. He stands at the beginning of creation, or whatever that is. I mean, how long is it? It's an incredible amount it's a great amount of time. He stretches across the entire universe. Going back to the first verse in Isaiah. Heavens are His throne, earth is His footstool. Get your head around that. Meditate on that. That is His greatness. That's how great He is. And I don't mean to make you feel small, but I'm sorry, I feel a little small when I think about those things, which is that humility. It's putting us in our place. He knows the number of hairs on your head. Why he would do that, I don't know, but it's in the Bible. He knows the number of hairs on your head. Great. Can you add a few? Please. And then there's the ones we all were brought up in Sunday school. He's omnipotent. That is all-powerful. Omniscient. All-knowing. Omnipresent. He's everywhere. He is in control of all. He created all. He loves all because he created it all. This is his greatness. I mean, I'm just kind of stuck in these things right now. Because I think it's so important that the church understands these things in this time. I think we have a tendency to get focused on the world and the world's problems and the world's issues and the sin of the world, when, I'm sorry, our focus needs to be on his greatness.
Amen. Yep.
Because all the things of the world are going to what? Fade away. And when the world comes to us and says to you, why do you have such peace? Why do you not walk in fear in the face of what's going on in the world? We have an answer. Jesus, because our God is a great God. And I have nothing to fear. So I submit this to you. Is this what Paul was talking about in Philippians 2:12? Many of you may know this verse. Therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. And this is the other part. This book has really blown me away by stuff. For it is God who works in you to will and to act according to his good purpose. I think that is grace. For it is God's grace, that works in you, because there's nothing we can do. I can't stop sinning. But it is God's grace that works in me to will or to desire and to act out his good purposes. I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but this is just so full. So is this what Paul was talking about in Philippians 2:12? Working out our salvation with fear? All loving what he loves, hating what he hates, nothing to hide. Is that what Paul's talking about? Work out our salvation with fear and trembling. We are saved. I mean, Romans 8:10 tells us that. But there's more to our salvation, I believe, I'm getting to understand, than just being saved.
Amen. Yep.
Another man that I've read a lot of books about Rick Joyner talks about in his book about putting on a mantle of humility, because this hides the glory of man. And there's one verse I just want to share with you real quick, 1 Peter 5:5. Young men, in the same way, be submissive to those who are older. All of you, clothe yourselves with humility toward one another. So don't come to a brother in all this wound up pride, But there's this cloak of humility we can put on. And Rick Joyner talks about that, if you ever read some of his books. What is it? Torch and the Sword, The Sign. No, not The Sign. That's Robert Van Kampen. But also, if you want to get into another long study, this has taken me 2 years and I'm not done with it yet. Thomas à Kempis. He spends a whole lot of time talking about humility, and it is incredibly convicting. It is incredibly convicting. I'm telling you, folks, in this age, we have to walk in humility. We have to. Because if we try to do things in our own strength, If we try to walk in the world's ways and say, I'm better than the world, sorry, you're not better than the world either, by the way. You're a sinner. We're saved by grace. But we have to walk in humility, and that starts that process. Understanding His greatness. So I want to, Diane, I wish she was here today. Is she online? I don't know if she's online or not. But a couple weeks ago, she mentioned, she had a word, and she said, the doors of the old seasons are closed. The doors of the new season is open. As I started, Jeff Kistler and I have been talking a lot. We really feel that this is the open door of the new season. To begin to understand, to walk in the fear of the Lord. And what is that all about? His greatness, His humility. I really believe that's what the Lord is calling us into. I don't know. She also says, I'm restoring. Oh, this was good. Yes. I am restoring, and Diane said this 2 weeks ago, I am restoring the awe, the wonder, the reverence of my holy name.
Amen.
That's the open door, I believe, that the Lord has before us today. I don't know if things are getting worse or better in the world. I mean, I've been walking this earth for 50 some odd years. And yeah, some things are better, some things are worse. But I will admit, the things of the world do seem to be getting, things like the world's going to hell in a handbasket. And while we need to be aware of the things of the world, we also need to keep our minds, eyes, flesh, completely fixed on God. So when the terrible things of the world do happen, we will not be afraid of the events in the world because we will not be afraid of the events in the world because we fear the one who created the world. And we walk in the humility of His greatness, knowing that everything is unfolding according to His perfect will. There is no need to be emotionally, physically afraid. There's no need. So I hope that I threw a lot at you. I feel like it was a lot. It's still a lot of stuff that I'm still working through. It's kind of like when you teach and you have to teach a new lesson, you're kind of working through it yourself, and you get in front of the class, you go, did you get it? Because I'm not sure I got it. So I hope you get it. Obviously record it, watch it again. I encourage you to look up some John Bevere's podcasts. Grab Thomas à Kempis. By the way, he wrote this back in the 1500s. He was a monk in the 1500s. It's pretty powerful stuff. It really is. So I encourage you to do that. That's all I got. So let's pray and then we can worship. Father God,